Sarah had waited years for this moment. After scrimping and saving, she finally closed on the house in the charming Willow Creek neighborhood, a quiet community lined with tall oak trees, neatly trimmed lawns, and pastel-colored homes with flower boxes hanging from windows. It was everything she had dreamed of, a place to call her own, a fresh start. On moving day, the sun was warm, the sky a clear blue. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains and across picket fences, their faces polite but distant. The HOA president, a sharply dressed woman named Marla, approached with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Welcome to Willow Creek," she said, her voice cool but precise. "We have rules here, rules that keep this neighborhood special. I'm sure you'll want to follow them." Sarah nodded, brushing off the chill creeping up her spine. She figured Marla was just doing her job. But as the days passed, the welcome wore thin. It started with a letter slipped under her door. "Your fence is not compliant with HOA standards. Please repaint it white by the end of the week." Sarah frowned. The fence was freshly painted, white just like the others. She called the HOA office, hoping for clarification, but was met with curt responses and a warning that non-compliance could lead to fines. That night, as she unpacked boxes in the dim glow of her new kitchen, the phone rang sharply. Glancing at the clock, midnight, Sarah's heart skipped. On the other end, a hushed, unfamiliar voice said, "Fix your fence, or there will be consequences." The line went dead before she could reply. She stared at the receiver, unease settling in her stomach. Was this a prank, or something worse? The next morning, the air felt heavier. As Sarah stepped outside to tend to a flower bed, she noticed her neighbor across the street watching her through partially closed blinds. She smiled tentatively, but the neighbor quickly disappeared behind the curtains. Sarah tried to shake off the creeping feeling of being watched. After all, she owned this land. No one had the right to threaten her or make her feel unwelcome. But the nightmare was just beginning. A few days later, as Sarah was watering her garden, she spotted a black SUV parked across the street. Two men in suits stepped out, their badges glinting in the sun. "Police officers." "Ms. Thompson?" one asked, approaching her calmly. "Yes, that's me." "We've had reports of suspicious activity at your property," the officer said, scanning the yard. Sarah's mind reeled. Suspicious activity. What on earth could that mean? She had lived quietly since she arrived. The officers asked a few questions. Had she seen strangers lurking? Was she hosting gatherings after hours? All of which Sarah answered truthfully, confusion mounting. After a thorough look around, the officers left with a polite but distant nod. The black SUV was gone, but Sarah's nerves were raw. Later that evening, a terse voicemail awaited her. "HOA insists you correct your fence issue immediately. Failure to comply will lead to further action." The calls, the visits, the strange warnings. They felt like a slow, tightening noose. Sarah sat alone in her living room, the weight of it all pressing down. She owned her home, yet the feeling of ownership slipped through her fingers, replaced by an invisible chain of control and suspicion. Who wanted her out, and why? As shadows lengthened outside, Sarah knew this fight wasn't just about a fence. It was about something much bigger and darker, lurking beneath the calm surface of Willow Creek. The days after the midnight phone call blurred into a haze of sleepless nights and cautious steps. Sarah found herself double-checking every inch of her property, terrified that some invisible rule or secret HOA law might be lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce. It was a cool, gray morning when the sirens shattered the fragile calm of Willow Creek. Sarah had just brewed her first cup of coffee and was about to step out for a quick walk when a police cruiser pulled up slowly in front of her house. Two officers stepped out, their faces serious but polite. Sarah's heart thundered. "Miss Thompson?" one asked. "Yes, that's me," Sarah said, forcing calm into her voice. We received a report of suspicious activity here, the officer said. Is there anything unusual you can tell us about? Sarah blinked, bewildered. No, I've just been unpacking and settling in. No parties, no guests, just me. The other officer glanced down at his clipboard. The report came from a neighbor, said they saw some unfamiliar people coming and going late at night. Sarah's mind raced. She hadn't had any visitors, no one but the moving company a week ago. Had the HOA made another complaint? Or was someone trying to get her in trouble? We'll need to ask a few questions, the first officer said gently, and take a look around. For the next 20 minutes, Sarah answered questions about her schedule, the people she'd interacted with, her reasons for moving here. The officers circled her home, shining flashlights into dark corners, inspecting her yard, her porch, even her mailbox. Neighbors peeked cautiously from behind curtains, their faces masks of polite curiosity. Or was it something colder? Sarah felt their eyes burning into her back like daggers. After what felt like an eternity, the officers returned and offered a faint smile. We don't see any problems, one said. Thanks for cooperating. As the police car drove away, a hollow silence settled over the street. Sarah stood on her porch, trembling. The officers had reassured her, but the damage was done. Word would spread. The suspicion, the whispered doubts, Sarah's peace of mind had been shattered. Later that day, the HOA sent a formal letter, this time demanding immediate compliance with an obscure rule about outdoor decorations. The tone was threatening, implying fines and legal action if she failed to obey. Sarah sat at her kitchen table, her hands trembling as she reread the letter. How had owning a home become a battle? She felt like an intruder in her own sanctuary. Her phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number appeared. You don't belong here. Fix your fence or we'll call again. Sarah's fingers froze. Over the screen. Her breath caught. Who was watching her? Why the constant harassment? She decided to reach out to a few neighbors she'd spoken to during moving day, hoping to find an ally. But their answers were evasive, eyes shifting nervously. Marla's just protecting the community, one said. You don't want to. Get on the wrong side of the HOA. Sarah's stomach churned. This wasn't protection. It was intimidation. That night, as she locked her doors, she thought about the officers at her doorstep. How many times would they come? How many neighbors would call them in? And what would happen if she refused to back down? The nightmare of ownership had only just begun. Outside, the streetlights flickered. Somewhere in the darkness, a car idled. Silently, its windows dark and inscrutable, Sarah pulled the curtains closed. The question loomed. How far would the HOA go to drive her away from her own land? The morning after the police visit, Sarah woke to a chill that wasn't from the cool spring air. It clung to her like a shadow she couldn't shake. The house that once felt like her sanctuary now felt like a cage with invisible bars. As she stepped outside, she noticed something unsettling. Her mailbox, once sturdy and plain, was splattered with bright red paint, a crude message scrawled in jagged letters. Outsider. The sharp sting of the word cut deeper than she expected. Her heart pounded as she pulled out her phone, ready to call the police. But before she could dial, the front doorbell rang sharply. Sarah froze. No one usually rang without warning here. She peeked through the peephole to see Marla, the HOA president, standing with a clipboard and a smile that didn't reach her cold eyes. Good morning, Sarah, Marla said smoothly, stepping onto the porch uninvited. I thought we should have a little chat about neighborhood standards. Sarah swallowed her unease but kept her voice steady. Is there a problem, Marla? Marla's smile tightened. You know the rules about garden decorations, fences, even paint colors. Several residents have complained about your yard, claim it doesn't fit our aesthetic. She waved the clipboard. This is a formal notice. Consider it a warning." Sarah stared at the letter in Marla's hand. It was filled with vague accusations and threatening language, the kind that left little room for negotiation. "Is this why you called the police on me?" Sarah asked quietly. Marla's eyes flickered, and for a split second, Sarah thought she saw something almost amused. "We're just making sure everyone follows the community guidelines. It's for the good of the neighborhood." Marla turned to leave, but stopped. "Be careful, Sarah. This community doesn't tolerate troublemakers." After the door clicked shut, Sarah sank against it, her body trembling. Was it really about fences and flowers, or something else? Over the next few days, Sarah noticed shadows lurking, faces watching from behind blinds, cars parked suspiciously across the street. Her plants were mysteriously uprooted overnight. Notes taped to her door threatened fines, police calls even. Eviction. One evening, as dusk settled, she found a flyer pinned to her front gate. The headline read, "Protect our neighborhood, say no to outsiders." It was anonymous but filled with accusations that painted Sarah as a disruptive force. The neighborhood that once seemed welcoming was now a maze of whispered threats and hidden eyes. Sarah began locking her doors earlier, double-checking windows, and walking cautiously after dark. At the next HOA meeting, she stood up, voice shaking but determined. "Why am I being targeted? I'm trying to be a good neighbor. Why call the police on me for owning my home?" The room grew cold. Marla responded smoothly, "Rules are rules. We all agreed to them when we moved here. But some neighbors exchanged uneasy glances, and Sarah noticed a few hands reluctantly raising in quiet support. That night, alone in her kitchen, Sarah reviewed every letter, every threat. A pattern emerged, a chilling orchestration designed to isolate her, to make her feel like a trespasser on her own property. Was this just an overzealous HOA, or something darker? A vendetta maybe, or a carefully laid trap to push her out? Her. Phone buzzed again. Another message. "Last chance. Fix your property or face the consequences." Sarah clenched her fists. She owned this land. But owning it felt like a curse, one that might cost her everything if she didn't fight back. And the fight was only just beginning. The night was thick with silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the cool breeze. Sarah lay, awake, staring at the ceiling, mind racing with unanswered questions. The hostility from the HOA wasn't just about rules. It felt personal. But why? She needed answers. The next evening, under cover of darkness, Sarah decided to investigate. Her house was dimly lit, the porch light off to avoid drawing attention. She grabbed a flashlight and quietly stepped outside. The neighborhood was eerily still. Even the usual chorus of crickets seemed muted, as if the whole street was holding its breath. She circled her yard slowly, heart pounding, scanning for anything unusual. That's when she saw it, a small black dome hidden in the corner of her porch roof. A security camera. Her breath caught. She hadn't installed any cameras. Holding her breath, Sarah moved closer and inspected it. The lens pointed directly at her front door, watching her every move. She glanced around nervously, wondering how long it had been there. Then she noticed more. Hidden cameras tucked discreetly on neighboring houses, all angled toward her property. A cold wave of realization hit her. The HOA wasn't just enforcing rules, they were spying on her. Who was watching, and why? The next morning, Sarah visited the local hardware store under the pretense of buying supplies, but instead asked about surveillance equipment in the neighborhood. The clerk raised an eyebrow but shrugged. "Some neighborhoods get a bit protective," he said vaguely. "Some HOAs install cameras, but it's usually for security. Doesn't mean they use them to spy on you." Sarah wasn't so sure. Back home, she reviewed the HOA's bylaws online, digging through pages of fine print and legal jargon. Nothing mentioned cameras or surveillance. If the HOA was spying, it was illegal and terrifying. Determined to dig deeper, Sarah started asking neighbors. Most brushed her off or changed the subject, but one elderly man, Mr. Whitman, quietly beckoned her inside. "I've lived here for 20 years," he whispered, his voice shaky. "The HOA's gotten worse over the last decade. Marla and her group, they've always been strict, but lately, it's like they're trying to control everything, who comes in, who stays, even what you do in your own yard." He paused, glancing around nervously. "I think they're hiding something. There's talk of money, influence, and those cameras. They're not just for security, they're watching us all." Sarah left Mr. Whitman's house feeling a mixture of fear and determination. The HOA was more than just a group of rule enforcers. They were a shadowy force, wielding power behind closed doors. That night, as she sat in her darkened living room, her phone buzzed with a new text message. "We see you watching." Her blood ran cold. Someone knew she had found the cameras. The surveillance was turning personal. Sarah locked her doors, drew the curtains tight, and vowed not to let fear win. The question now was, how far would the HOA go to keep their secrets hidden? And was she ready to face the truth no matter the cost? The next morning dawned gray and heavy, as if the sky itself was weighed down by the secrets simmering beneath Willow Creek's perfect facade. Sarah woke with a tight knot in her chest, the previous night's message still burning on her mind. "We see you watching." She knew one thing for sure. This fight wasn't just hers anymore. It was a battle for the soul of the whole neighborhood. Determined, Sarah reached out to the few neighbors who had shown any kindness, hoping to find allies. Her first stop was Mrs. Diaz, an older woman who had waved hello the day Sarah moved. But when Sarah knocked on the door, the smile Mrs. Diaz gave her was strained, almost fearful. "I'm sorry, Sarah," Mrs. Diaz whispered, glancing nervously down the street. "I like you, I really do. But the HOA, they don't just enforce rules. They have eyes everywhere. You keep pushing, you risk everything." Sarah's heart sank. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Diaz's hands trembled slightly. "People lose their jobs, their friendships, even their homes for crossing Marla. It's like living under a shadow. I want to help, but I'm scared." Sarah nodded, understanding the invisible chains that bound her neighbors. Next, she tried the young couple down the block, the Parkers, hoping their fresh eyes might bring fresh courage. They greeted her warmly but quickly closed their door when she mentioned the HOA's tactics. "They've made it clear they don't want outsiders stirring trouble," Mr. Parker said quietly. "We're just trying to keep our heads down." Sarah felt the walls closing in. Even those who sympathized were trapped in silence, afraid to speak out. Back at home, she scrolled through the local online forum for Willow Creek residents. The threads were filled with complaints and praises in equal measure, but a pattern emerged. Most praised the HOA's high standards, while the dissenters were quickly shouted down or ignored. It was a community divided between those who feared the HOA's power and those who embraced it. That evening, Sarah attended the monthly HOA meeting. The room was packed, tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Marla took the floor first, her voice smooth but commanding. "We are here to protect the value and beauty of Willow Creek. Any attempts to disrupt that will be met with swift action." When it was Sarah's turn to speak, she stood tall despite the pounding of her heart. "I'm here because I want to be part of this community, but the harassment, the police visits, the surveillance, it's not right. We deserve transparency. Respect." A few heads nodded, but many faces were cold, some even hostile. Marla shot her a sharp glance. "Rules are rules, Sarah. If you don't like it here, there are other neighborhoods." Whispers echoed around the room. Sarah realized this wasn't just about a fence or garden decor. It was about control. The HOA wielded its power to keep everyone in line. Fear was their weapon. On her way home, she noticed a group of neighbors gathered quietly by the street, whispering. As she passed, their eyes flickered toward her, full of worry and warning. Back in her house, Sarah's phone buzzed again. "Last warning, stop digging." The message was clear, but Sarah clenched her jaw. She wouldn't back down, because this wasn't just about her home anymore. It was about breaking the silence, breaking the fear. The neighborhood was divided, but the question remained, who would break first? The next morning, Sarah awoke to the unmistakable sound of a truck idling outside her home. Peering through the curtains, she saw a white van with the HOA logo parked across the street, two men unloading equipment. Her stomach tightened. Was this just routine maintenance, or something more? She stepped outside cautiously, phone in hand. Ready to document everything, a man in a crisp polo approached, clipboard in hand. "Good morning, Ms. Thompson. We're here to inspect your property for compliance with HOA regulations." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Again? I just received a letter last week. What exactly are you inspecting?" The man smiled thinly. "Routine? Checks. We're making sure all landscaping, fences, and decorations meet community standards." As the men began their inspection, Sarah's mind raced. She knew this was no simple inspection. It was intimidation, a way to make her feel watched, controlled, vulnerable. Inside, her phone buzzed relentlessly with texts and calls from neighbors, some supportive, many warning her to back down. Later that day, a thick envelope arrived in her mailbox. Inside was a formal notice. The HOA was filing a lawsuit against her for violations of community standards and disturbing the peace. The letter listed dozens of alleged infractions, many fabricated or exaggerated, and demanded she cease all activities that conflicted with HOA rules or face hefty fines and possible eviction. Sarah felt a surge of anger and disbelief. They were trying to strip her of her rights, her home, her dignity. Determined to fight back, she contacted a local attorney who specialized in property and HOA disputes. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Claire, reviewed the case and nodded gravely. "This HOA is overstepping," Claire said. "They don't have the right to harass you like this or spy on you. We can challenge the lawsuit, but it won't be easy. They have resources, and they'll use every tactic to wear you down." Sarah felt a mix of hope and dread. The legal battle was just beginning. Word spread quickly in the neighborhood. Some residents voiced support for Sarah, quietly questioning the HOA's harsh tactics. Others doubled down, fearful of rocking the boat. At the next HOA meeting, tensions erupted. Sarah stood before the assembly, her voice strong despite the fear clutching her chest. "This isn't about fences or flowers. It's about the right to live in your own home without harassment," Marla shot back coldly. "This community thrives because of order. Chaos will not be tolerated." The room divided. Friends turned to foes, neighbors into strangers. That night, Sarah received a new threat, more direct than before. "Stop the fight, or the police won't be your only problem." Her heart raced. Was this just intimidation, or something darker? Sarah knew she couldn't back down. Her home, her rights, her sanity were on the line, and the more the HOA pushed, the stronger her resolve became. Because sometimes, the fight for your own land becomes a fight for justice, for freedom. And Sarah was ready to go all the way. The tension in Willow Creek was palpable. Sarah's quiet life had exploded into a fierce storm of accusations, whispers, and veiled threats. Every glance from a neighbor felt like a challenge, every step outside shadowed by suspicion. But beneath the surface of the HOA's relentless campaign, Sarah sensed cracks forming, cracks she could exploit. Late one evening, after the community had settled into uneasy silence, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, poring over the mountain of letters, notices, and emails she'd received. Something didn't add up. The fines, the threats, the surveillance. It was all too organized, too precise. She recalled Mr. Whitman's warning about money and influence. Was someone profiting from this campaign of control? Then, as she reviewed the latest HOA meeting minutes posted online, her eyes caught a strange entry. A motion approved by Marla and a small group of board members to acquire additional property assets through enforcement of community guidelines. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Was the HOA trying to drive homeowners out to buy their properties cheaply? She cross-referenced property records and discovered several homes had recently been sold, owners pressured by fines, harassment, and lawsuits. One neighbor who had quietly moved away was rumored to have accepted a low offer from an anonymous buyer connected to the HOA. This was no simple neighborhood committee. It was a predatory force, systematically squeezing residents to expand their control and wealth. Sarah's resolve hardened. The next day, she reached out to a local journalist known for exposing corruption. She shared everything: the police visits, the threats, the secret cameras, the lawsuits, and the property grab scheme. Within days, the story broke. The headline was explosive. HOA under fire for harassment and illegal surveillance in Willow Creek. Neighbors who had been silent began speaking out. Police investigations were launched. The HOA was forced to answer questions about their surveillance and aggressive tactics. At the next meeting, Marla's confident facade cracked. Faced with mounting pressure, she attempted to dismiss the allegations as misunderstandings and routine enforcement. But the community's anger was undeniable. Sarah stood in the crowd, watching as the power that had loomed over her shattered piece by piece. But just as victory seemed close, Sarah's phone buzzed with a chilling message. "You're making powerful enemies. Watch your back." The fight was far from over. Behind the headlines and legal battles lurked deeper, darker secrets, forces determined to protect their empire at any cost. Sarah knew this was her defining moment. Would she stand strong and reclaim her home? Or would the shadows of Willow Creek finally consume her? The night was darker than usual, the air thick with anticipation. Sarah sat by her window, eyes sharp, every nerve on edge. The warnings were no longer subtle. She felt watched, not just by the neighborhood, but by something far more ominous. Days after the expose, the HOA's grip was loosening publicly, but behind closed doors, Marla and her inner circle weren't ready to surrender. Rumors spread of secret meetings, whispered threats, and plans to undermine Sarah by any means necessary. Then it happened. One evening, as Sarah returned from work, her driveway was blocked by a black SUV. A man in a dark suit stepped out, his face unreadable. "Ms. Thompson," he said smoothly, "I'm here on behalf of the HOA board. We'd like to discuss a settlement." Sarah's heart pounded, but she stood her ground. "I want transparency. I want the harassment to stop." The man's smile was thin. "We can offer you a way out. Leave the neighborhood quietly and we'll drop the lawsuit." Sarah shook her head. "I'm not leaving. This is my home." The man's eyes hardened. "Be careful, Ms. Thompson. Sometimes fighting isn't the safest choice." The message was clear, but Sarah refused to back down. Days later, the police announced a formal investigation into the HOA's illegal surveillance and harassment. Marla and several board members were subpoenaed, their secrets unraveling under scrutiny. As the pressure mounted, a stunning revelation emerged. Several HOA board members were linked to a real estate company aggressively buying up properties, under questionable circumstances, profiting from forced sales. The neighborhood gasped. At a final community meeting, Marla tried to defend herself, but the crowd was no longer on her side. Sarah's courage had sparked a movement. Neighbors who once feared her now stood beside her, demanding justice and reform. But just when Sarah thought the nightmare was ending, a final twist shocked the entire community. One of the trusted board members, seemingly an ally, was exposed as the mastermind behind the harassment campaign, someone using the HOA as a front to seize control and wealth. The betrayal cut deep. Yet with the truth out, the HOA was dissolved. New, transparent leadership was elected. Surveillance equipment was removed. Lawsuits were dropped or settled fairly. Sarah's home was finally peaceful again. As she stood on her porch, the morning sun casting warm light over the neighborhood, she felt a profound sense of victory, not just for herself but for everyone who had dared to stand up. The battle for her land had become a battle for justice, community, and respect. And in the end, Sarah had won.